I'm Gretchen, and I spent about 20 years both volunteered and paid in emergency services. And today I want to talk a little bit about firefighting. First, I want to share a story. I helped with the evacuation of a nursing home, and there was smoke in the building, and we helped all the older people get to a safe place. And after finishing up, I went ahead and I took off my helmet, I took off my SCBA mask, and breathed for a little bit. And as I was doing that, I overheard one of the residents that we just evacuated lean over and say to her friend, "I think that fireman is a girl." I was, in fact, a firefighter who was a girl. And it may surprise you to know that in the history of the United States, there have been a lot of firefighters who are girls, dating back to the early days right after the Revolution. So I'm going to give you a brief history of women in firefighting in the United States. I'm going to talk about how women gained acceptance in the field. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that still exist for women in firefighting. So I'm sure that everybody knows women are quite capable of filling the boots of a firefighter and quite capable of doing the job. And that's been demonstrated as early as 1818 when Molly Williams, a slave from New York, was the first documented female firefighter in the United States. She was owned by Benjamin Amar, who was part of the Oceanus Engine Company, and she fought fires wearing a calico dress and an apron, and she was lauded as just as good a fireman as the lads. Now, at the same time frame, Mariana Betts in 1820 was a volunteer firefighter in Pittsburgh, and she didn't take a lot of nonsense. She was known for pouring buckets of water onto unhelpful male bystanders who were not participating in the bucket brigades. She volunteered for 10 years with that department. So moving forwards through time, the historical records of firefighting and fire departments and women in firefighting were pretty poor. There were glimpses of women in firefighting all throughout the early history of the United States. In 1910 and 1920, there were all-women volunteer companies in Silver Springs, Maryland, and in Los Angeles. And in 1926, Emma Vernell was New Jersey's first official female firefighter after her husband, who was also a firefighter, passed away. Now, during World War I and World War II, this was really a turning point for women in many traditionally male-dominated professions. This was a time when, because the men were all overseas fighting a war, women were asked to step in and fill roles that were traditionally filled by men, including firefighting. So at that time, women fire brigades were formed, women filled the roles. After the soldiers returned from World War II, that took a little bit of a step back, but moving into the 60s and 70s, many all-women fire departments were they're starting to grow in many locations throughout the United States. The first women's crews to fight wildland fires with the U.S. Forest Service formed in the 70s, and the first known female fire chief for a volunteer department was Ruth Capello in 1973. She was the chief of Butte Falls, Oregon Fire Department. And so in 1974, this was a pretty historic moment for women in firefighting. Judith Livers became the first career firefighter or paid firefighter. And she was with the Arlington County, Virginia Fire Department. And so 1974 seems like kind of a long time ago. I want to talk about somebody who was really instrumental in paving the way for women in firefighting. Brenda Berkman in 1977 passed the written exam for the New York City Fire Department, and then she failed the physical portion of the test. After failing that test, officials were heard to say that that was the most difficult fire test the department had ever administered, and it was designed more to keep women out than to accurately assess job-related skills. So Brenda Berkman led a lawsuit against the New York City Fire Department And in 1982, she won that lawsuit, and she was allowed to take the newly created test, which was designed to measure actual aptitude. And in 1982, she and 40 other women joined the New York Fire Department. Later that year, she was fired, allegedly for lack of physical ability, in spite of performing highly on every test of physical ability required by the fire department. So she went back to court, and in 1983, she won a lawsuit requiring her and another firefighter fired at the same time to be reinstated. She served in the New York Fire Department until 2006, when she retired to the rank of captain, and during that time she founded the United Women's Firefighters Organization. So among the highlights of her career was when she responded to the World Trade Center event at 9/11, and following that, she was not very happy with the way the accounts referred to firemen, and they didn't acknowledge the women who served at 9/11. And she, in her push for recognition for those women, produced a video titled "The Women at Ground Zero." And even into retirement, she continues to advocate for gender equality. So even today, and in the very recent past, there's still some issues in this field. So here's some statistics. In 2002, only 2% of the firefighters in the United States were female. And in 2018, in Los Angeles, only 3.1% of firefighters were female, in spite of a 2013 resolution to increase the number of female firefighters to 5% by 2020. And in 2015, there were only 58 women, which is less than 0.5% in the New York City Fire Department. However, on a positive note, in 2015, Danae Mines was the first woman in the New York City Fire Department calendar of heroes, which is a pretty fun pinup calendar. So in conclusion, women really have been very capable of fighting fires since the beginning of time. And throughout history, there's been examples of them doing exactly that. Unfortunately, only recently, women have been allowed to be part of both volunteer and paid departments, and in some places it really is still a struggle. So lots of work and lawsuits have made the fire service more open to women today than any time in our history. And even in my lifetime, I've seen a great deal of progress in the attitudes of everyone around me. So I want to share one story before I conclude. And throughout my career as a firefighter, I always worked in fire prevention. And when I first started out, I would go into a small class of young children and I would say, "Hi, I'm firefighter Gretchen." And then I would have to spend the next 5 minutes or so convincing them that I am a real firefighter and I do run into burning buildings just like firemen. About halfway through my volunteer time in the fire service, I went to talk to a class of kids and I said, "Hi, I'm firefighter Gretchen. And I am a real firefighter." And they just looked at me and they said, "Well, of course you are." And I realized that I didn't need to convince them anymore. And so I think that as we learn and as we grow, women will be more accepted, not only in firefighting, but in any job that they wish to do. So thank you for listening.